Next week, Nelson Provincial Museum will host an exhibition called Let Me Be Myself, the life story of Anne Frank. It's been seen, or a version of it has been seen all over the world, this show, and it's in New Zealand for several years, supported by the Holocaust Centre of New Zealand. Boyd Clapp is chair of the exhibition organisation and also led the establishment of the memorial to Anne Frank in Wellington, which was recently unveiled. He was the founder, Boyd Clapp, of the New Zealand Netherlands Foundation. His long career in the insurance industry and his services to the community have been recognised and honoured, and he has written an autobiography called Between Two Countries. He's 94 now, but his energy and his moustache remain vigorous. How are you, Boyd?
Hi, Kim. How are you?
Nice to talk to you. When did you start being involved in the Anne Frank business?
I started 11 years ago. It's quite strange because I was 83, I think, when I started. I had no involvement in Anne Frank before that.
I was going to ask you when you first became aware of her, because you're not from Amsterdam, although from Holland, yes. But when were you first aware of her existence and her sad end in Bergen-Belsen, of course?
Well, really not until after the war, not until after 1945. Of course, Anne Frank is so well known in Holland and around the world, but in particular in Netherlands. So I was aware of it. I had visited the Anne Frank house, but I had no connection with the Anne Frank organization at all until 11 years ago.
And what happened?
Well, at that time I was running the Prudential Insurance Company, and one of my tenants was Inge Wolf, the Wolf photography business. And we became very close friends. Ron, her husband, was a wonderful man, and he had been the photographer for 25 years of the Prudential. So we became friends, and then poor Ron, of course, was killed in a helicopter crash that many people remember. And Inge and I continued to be friends. And from time to time, Inge would say, there is an exhibition, would you be interested in doing that? So one day she rang and said, I've got a man here from Amsterdam, and he is trying to get the Anne Frank travelling exhibition established, but nobody is interested. Would you be prepared to set it up for 3 months?
And you'd already set up the New Zealand Netherlands Foundation.
That was many years before that.
And so you were a kind of a natural go-to guy for that, weren't you?
Well, maybe. Yeah, I bought the Rembrandt exhibition here and the World Press Photo exhibition. But yes, to her, it was more, I think she had seen me being involved in the community and organising events.
Sure.
And she said, maybe Boyd can help you.
Yeah. And you are renowned for being able to organise things.
Well, I don't know about that.
You are. What do you do? Do you just are you decisive and efficient?
Well, some people think I am.
Or persuasive.
No, I am committed. I think I'm passionate about what I do. I get asked for many organizations to be involved, and I say no if my heart is not in it. But in this particular case with discrimination, I'm totally committed. And when I'm committed, I have an objective and I go for it.
Just talking about the memorial that you organised and unveiled in Wellington, 3 chairs, 3 steel chairs.
Yeah.
Just talk me through that. Why 3 chairs? Why one facing away?
Well, the chairs that are there are in this small park where 2 years ago we planted 15 kowhai trees for her life and 75 for the life she never had. And of course, in the years to come, they're planted close together. It will be, in the spring, it will be absolutely beautiful.
I can hear the trees already.
Can you see? Yeah. Now, in the gap between the 15 and the 75, we were going to put a couple of seats, just ordinary seats like you have in the Botanic Gardens or anywhere else. Then I met a person I hadn't met before, Matthijs Sillier. And he is the deputy head of the School of Design at Massey University. A very philosophical, creative guy who I really liked. And we started talking about what to do, and he said, look, seats are everywhere. We should do something to make people think about discrimination. Now, most memorials around the world will be a statue of Anne Frank. But he said, no, that's looking at something and then saying, yeah, she did a great thing. We need to create something that made people think.
And the chairs
And the chairs
imply an absence, don't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, and those two chairs face each other, and the other chair faces away. So what he said is, I want people to come up to that little park and think, good heavens, somebody left a few chairs behind. And then go up to it, and then experience what it is. And then on the chairs, in Teremari and in English, are statements by Anne Frank that there is good in everybody. So people will sit, and I have already had couples saying to me, oh, I took the kids there, and they said, then we started talking, why were Jews killed? You know, what happened? What is discrimination? What is bullying?
You remember from your youth, Jews just disappearing, right?
Oh, well, look, I was 13 when the war started, when the Germans invaded, and I was 18 when the war
Although you
finished.
do recall that as quite a fun day because you hadn't done your French homework and you didn't have to go to
That's
school.
absolutely right.
Ah.
Yeah, that was my first experience of the war. Yeah.
You went on to be a courier in the resistance, the underground.
But only at the last part of the 5-year occupation. What happened is, after one bridge too far and Montgomery could not cross the Rhine, the northern part of the Netherlands continued to be occupied by the Germans, and the southern part was liberated. Now, what happened then, we thought that we were free, the flags came out, people in the underground in Russia came out, and of course the Germans knew where they were. A lot of them were arrested and executed, and younger people were then asked to join. They didn't like young people in the underground because young people break. They talk to other people, and one of the things about being in the resistance is that you don't exist. So that's when I became a courier, yeah. And
you were never caught, obviously.
No, my bike was once nearly confiscated by German soldiers with papers that I was carrying under my saddle.
But they never found them?
No, I kept my bike.
What was on the paper? What were you transporting?
Well, what was happening was there were different things that were very important for people to know, for the Allied forces. One was, to what extent were the air raids successful? Were they effective? And, of course, the only way they could get that information is by a secret radio operator radioing that information to the Netherlands, to United Kingdom. Then there were the V1s and the V2s, you know, the rockets and the missiles. They were in my area, very close to my home, about 5K. What time, where were they? Because they were moving them all the time. Army movements, soldiers going from one spot to another. So all that information was extremely important to the Allies in the bombing of the targets that they were looking for. So that's what it was, really. So somebody would come to my place. I didn't know that name. I didn't know that person. They would give me the papers, or I added papers, and then I would bike 15 k's to the next point with all those papers under the saddle in the bike.
You were very young. Was it
17?
Yeah. Was it more of an adventure than a thing to be frightened about?
It's a bit of both. You know, I was very patriotic.
Both,
you know, I did really want liberty. I wanted democracy. I wanted freedom. But it's a bit of adventure when you're young, you know, doing something that there's a bit of excitement, a little bit of danger. Yeah, there's a bit of that, yeah.
When you quoted the inscription at the Anne Frank Memorial in Wellington, "There is good in everybody," she said. Do you think there is?
In most. I think that if I looked at what happened during those 5 years, looking back, the majority of people are bystanders. They don't want to get involved. Maybe that's 80%. That's just a figure. And on one extreme side, you've got the patriots, the people that are prepared to give their lives, and on the other side, you have the collaborators. But I think that most people are good at heart. I really believe so.
And perhaps dependent on circumstances to show the good or the bad.
Absolutely, yeah.
You went on to join the Dutch army. I would have thought you would have had enough of army and military, but you signed up.
Well, this was a historic issue. See, we were liberated, And after we were liberated after 5 years, we were going to liberate the Dutch East Indies. Because
liberate them from who? The Japanese?
From the Japanese.
Right.
And because if I look
back
into history...
You could have liberated them from yourselves, of course, could you not?
Totally stupid war. It was like Vietnam. I mean, what happened was wrong, but we didn't know that at the time. And out of patriotic duty, we went there because Sukarno, who was the first president of Indonesia, had been installed by the Japanese. So his supporters were seen as collaborators of the Japanese. So we went there to...
Not because he was seen as a communist.
No, he was not a communist because he actually supported... He suppressed the communists. No. He was a collaborator of the Japanese. So we were going to liberate, and excuse me for using that term, the natives. And so we got there. In 5 years' time, it was a struggle like Afghanistan. An enemy who you did not see. We lost 6,000 young men. 6,000 were killed in the little country. We had, in that period, more than 100,000 soldiers. Maybe 20,000 people were mentally or physically injured. For what? I was back 5 years ago. I was asked in Surabaya, the big city, the naval city in the east of Java, to lay a wreath on a cemetery where all these Dutch boys were. And I had Indonesian officers with me. It was a formal ceremony. And to me, walking to that point and putting the wreath down closed that issue, closed that period in Indonesia, which is not something to be proud of.
So do you feel regret for doing that? Regret for signing up?
There is... I mean, there's no point in going back and saying that was bad or that was good. You did what at that time you thought was right. Because you didn't know any other way. I mean, I was brought up at school where the Dutch East Indies were like part of the Netherlands.
That's what empires were like. Then.
They were. I mean, I knew all the cities and towns, and I could say Bali, Lombok, Sumba, Flores, Timor, all the little islands to the east of Java. That was part of our life, so we didn't know any other way. No, but I do think that the government at that time has a lot to be answered for, because if they had invited Sukarno, as Queen Wilhelmina wanted to the Netherlands and treated him with respect, they could have avoided, well, the thousands of Indonesians that died and the Dutch soldiers that died. So I think there was no foresight in what was happening.
No.
It was the end of the colonial empire, and it was not recognized.
No. Do you think that Indonesia is still suffering from the after effects of colonialism, as we are told that Maori and New Zealand are suffering?
That's not the impression I had when I went back. It was the first time after 50 years that I was there. The cities are big, public cities. I mean, Jakarta is a terrible place to get out of.
Yes.
The country just looked the same. I met many Indonesians. The interesting thing was that when I talked to young Indonesians, they said, "Oh, my grandfather used to speak Dutch." And I'm a very good friend of the Indonesian ambassador here. So I think time has gone on. We're now 3 generations later. I think it's history. I know that I gave a talk to a body in Rotorua, and I went to the Indonesian embassy and asked, what are your feelings about the Dutch? And this young man said, "Oh yes, the Dutch invaded Indonesia, didn't they? Invaded. I never thought of that word." So it was to them an invasion in history. I don't think... And at present, there is a lot of business contact between the two countries.
Mm-hmm. Would you call it an invasion now, were I to ask you?
I don't know what invasion really means. I mean, we came there unasked for, and there was a local population, so certainly we didn't settle. Holland did extremely well out of the Dutch East Indies. I mean, the enormous amount of taxation that came out of there, in fact, was part of the result of the Golden Age. I mean, the people like Rembrandt, etc., benefited from what happened in Indonesia.
I mean, we've just been hearing about the British East India Company, which was a terrible outfit, really. I mean, shocking, corrupt and inept. And all the stupid guys
Yeah.
from back home were sent out and did their worst in the far-flung stretches of the empire. I don't know whether the Dutch East India Company had the same kind of reputation.
I don't know much about the Dutch East India Company, but I think that most of the people who settled were patronizing. I don't think they were treated that badly, but they were patronizing.
Mm-hmm.
They were good people, you know. And when I was there as a young officer on my own on a plantation, when I drove in my Jeep through the plantation, the local people would stop and bow on the side of the road when I drove past.
That's weird.
And when I was on my own at night in my little village, at night when the guy came in with my food, he would come in, he would greet me by putting his hands together, and he would leave my room backwards.
Yeah.
To continue. So it was a patronizing, superior attitude.
Yeah. You were the rulers and they were the servants.
Yes,
generally
absolutely,
speaking.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of good was done. I mean, there's a plus and a minus. Roads were built and railways were built,
but only to enrich the Dutch. Let's be fair. I mean, that's what the British say. Well, we built all those railways. They only wouldn't have built the railways unless they wanted to extract as much as possible.
You're pretty right.
The things we've done.
Yeah, I agree with you.
You came to New Zealand. You ended up on a dairy farm.
Yep.
You and Ria working on a dairy farm.
Yep.
Which was a bit muddy, I imagine, for somebody who wasn't used to farming.
Well, I had studied, after my secondary education at the lycée, I studied tropical agriculture.
And you came to New Zealand?
But I went to Indonesia thinking I was going to be a tea planter.
Ah.
I was trained to be a tea planter. So I spoke Indonesian and Javanese, and the ultimate thing was to be the manager of a big estate. So when Indonesia became independent, and I was still there, in fact, I took the red, white, and blue flag down and raised the Merah Putih, the red-white. It was pretty obvious I had to go somewhere. And my immediate commander, I was a lieutenant, captain, married a Kiwi and said, look, come to Wellington. It's a tropical climate. I mean, people, working people park their trucks outside the house. They were egalitarian. We're all the same. It's a great place for you to go to. So the only way I could come is with my agriculture background to work on a farm, thinking it was a type of plantation. It wasn't actually.
No, not far from a plantation, I imagine.
No.
How long did you last for?
About 6 months.
Yeah. And then you fled to the insurance industry?
Well, on the farm, I think that if...
a lot of Dutch people have taken to dairy.
Well, most of them were farm boys.
Yeah.
You know, because particularly in the south of Holland, which is Catholic, the large families, there was only one that could take over the little farm. So all these boys went to the States and Canada, Australia and New Zealand. So in Southland and also in the Waikato, there are a lot of second, third generation farmers.
Yeah.
But they come from a farming background.
Right. And you came via
Indonesia. I didn't come from a farming background. I came from Indonesia.
No.
But one day somebody came to the farm in his car and sold me a £500 policy. And I thought, it's better to sit in a car and talk to people than milking cows at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I went into town. And they immediately said, yes, you can join us and you need to now apply for membership of the union. I said, no, I don't think that's necessary. And they said, well, if you don't become a member of the union, you can't start. So that was my first experience of what New Zealand was like in those days.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I started as an agent collecting premiums. And of course, this is 1951. There was quite a bit of discrimination. You know, my wife with a little baby in the tram in Wellington, when she spoke her mother tongue, Dutch, was told by somebody who turned around and said, go back to your own damn country if you can't speak our lingo.
Oh,
that was 1951. I didn't find much discrimination, except I remember in Pitoni, a woman came to the door the second time I came round and called out, Joan, come to the door, that foreign gentleman is here again. Come and have a look. I look normal, I think.
You would have done well in the Dutch community, the expats, though, wouldn't you?
In New Zealand, you mean? I was involved in charitable organisations starting involved in the Dutch club here.
I was thinking about selling them insurance.
Before the migration, I came before the migration started.
Oh, before the big migration.
So I think there were only about 60 Dutch people in Wellington with backgrounds, and they were, to a large extent, they came from the Dutch East Indies in 45.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So
because they didn't want to go back to Holland?
They probably had little contact. See, a lot of the Dutch Indonesian people had little contact with Holland. Their life was Indonesian. They spoke a different language. They looked different.
And also times were pretty hard in the Netherlands after the war, right?
Yeah. So they stayed here. But then when the migration started, the New Zealand tried to they couldn't get people from UK because of the war, of the loss of young lives. They tried to do a deal with Norway, Sweden. That didn't work, so they went to the Netherlands. Holland has always been a migrating country all around the world. So a deal was done between the two governments, where the New Zealand government paid half the fare and the Dutch government paid the other half fare. And when they came here, those people had to work for the government for 2 years. They built railroads and dams and all that sort of thing. They were mainly single. So I felt at that time that we had some responsibility to maybe build a centre in Wellington where people could come to, where they could speak their own language, where they could drink coffee, which nobody did in those days.
No, thanks for the coffee.
So we started. I started the Tulip restaurant, which was really
Tulip.
Yeah,
the Tulip restaurant.
Yeah. There were only 3 restaurants: Orsini's, the Boulevard, and the Tulip.
And what food did you serve at the restaurant?
Oh, I think that was mainly cauliflower. I think it was to a large extent Dutch food.
Yeah.
I can't be very specific, really, because I'm not a specialist in that area. But the main thing was not the food so much. There was a Dutch library.
Sure.
A Dutch library. They could play games. We had a little jazz group that played jazz because jazz was very popular in Holland always.
You know what? I'm very interested in national characteristics.
Yeah.
Which could veer into stereotypes. I do understand that. But stereotypes have an origin in some kind of definable national characteristic. Might be chicken or egg, but whatever. With that preamble, the Dutch are said to be pragmatic, efficient, and hardworking. Do you think that's true, or do we just get the pragmatic, efficient, hardworking ones and leave all the slackers back in Netherlands?
Yeah, but your last point is right, because migrants in all countries are quite often the people that want to get on and work hard. But I think that the Dutch in New Zealand, at all levels, have made a major contribution. But there's an interesting statement that I've often used, is that the Dutch are too honest to be polite, and the New Zealanders are too polite to be honest. and there's a bit of that, because we had to get used to the fact that curtains were not bad, they were unusual.
Curtains?
Curtains. In my home, somebody came and said, those curtains are unusual. And my wife said, you mean you don't like them?
Huh? Right.
So it's that straight speech that I think upsets people. And this is interesting if you look at the DNA of different cultures, where you misunderstand each other.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Do you think that you've become less direct as you've lived here longer?
Absolutely. I'm absolutely certain that I could not have had a successful career if I hadn't adjusted. But I think what I did retain was specific objectives, and go for that and stay on that course. But I adjusted when I was transferred to Australia. I found that I had to adjust to their culture, which was far more direct. And when I came back after 12 years having executive roles in Australia, I had to readjust to New Zealand culture, and not be too direct.
Yeah.
In other words, yes, I think of course you can never change completely, but you do have to adjust to your environment if you want to be successful in your new environment.
It's been lovely talking to you. It's been interesting talking to you, Boyd.
Thank you.
Ngā mihi. I've been talking to Boyd Clapp, who, among many other things, is responsible for the Travelling Anne Frank exhibition and indeed the memorial that's been unveiled in Wellington.